Welcome to the lecture. What we are going to do today is look at what is anthropology. So during this lecture, I'm going to lay the groundwork, give you some basics of the subfields that exist in anthropology, and then take you through some key terminology and give you an idea of the research methods that anthropologists use. So before we begin this lecture, what I want to do is I want to take you guys through a teaching philosophy that I have. Now, seeing as this is an online course, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to involve you guys in this, but I really want you to be active participants, not only in the course, but obviously in your own learning. So in this class, what I'm going to be doing is challenging you, and I'm going to challenge you to question not only the behavior of others, but to also question your own behaviors as well. This can be unnerving for a lot of individuals, but it will end up being a very, very valuable journey for you. So there will be times during this course where I'm going to make you evaluate the perspective of another individual in an objective way, meaning that you're not going to go into it with preconceived ideas or with kind of really heavy values that you carry with you all the time. I want you to try and see through the eyes of another individual. This will be difficult to do because some of the things that we will be looking about and some of the things that we will be talking about on the surface can seem so extreme or so out of the realm of what you would possibly consider to be normal. Now, it is important to note that just because we're going to look through the eyes of another individual, that doesn't mean that you are in any way condoning or justifying their actions. What it does is it gives individuals their own voice, and it causes you to kind of understand, or hopefully start to understand, that there are multiple ways to be alive and to be human, and that there's no one correct, right, and or true way to do things. So during this course, you are going to be asked by myself and also by Dr. Sperlich many times to take on the role of what I refer to and what Wade Davies refers to as the position of being an alien anthropologist. So you're basically going to be stepping outside of your own culture or stepping outside of what it is that you are looking at. And you are going to be viewing it again in a non-judgmental sort of way. You want to be exploring it and trying to find the value or trying to find the worth in these social and or cultural practices. So as Wade Davies says, we need to look at other cultures not as failed attempts to be us, that these are unique manifestations of the spirit of what it means to be human. These are other options and other visions of life itself and should be treated with respect and understood as being obviously equal to all other cultural examples that we see. So at this point in the lecture, I would like you just to pause for a moment and go to the UR course site. I have video 1 labeled there for you. It is a couple-minute long video. I would like you to watch that and then come back and resume the lecture. So now, hopefully, you have a little bit better idea of the approach that we're going to take in this course. I want you to be involved in it. I want you to be a part of what is happening rather than just being kind of a passive bystander. It should hopefully cause you to retain this information a little bit better, and also to find that it does in fact have a value in your life, that this is going to be something that is going to kind of change the way that you see things and will benefit you no matter what discipline you in fact are in. All right, so for us to begin this lecture, what we first need to do is to come up with a definition of what anthropology in fact is. So if we break down the word anthropology, anytime you see an ology, that just means the study of or the knowledge of. So this is a discipline where we look at human beings, anthropos. So we look at human beings and we study them anytime, anywhere, any place. And so an anthropologist will study people, their origins, their development, contemporary variations of them, wherever and whenever. And so through fieldwork, through participant observation, an anthropologist will seek to explain human behavior and try and understand the diverse ways that individuals in fact organize their lives through the lens of culture. The focus of this course is sociocultural anthropology. And sociocultural anthropology kind of causes a researcher to try and explore beyond the initial domain of everyday experiences. And what we try and do within the discipline is to discover patterns and meanings that often form the structure of our societies. And it is these patterns and meanings which actually give value to our actions and our interactions. So again, anthropology is the study of human beings anywhere, anytime, any place. Now, as I'd said to you guys at the start of the lecture, anthropology has subfields. So the definition I just gave to you of anthropology is the overarching term. Underneath this overarching term are various subfields. So we have 5 subfields that we're going to be looking at. We have physical biological anthropology, which is the oldest subfield. Now, in physical and biological anthropology, what these anthropologists do is focus on human beings, and they look at them as being just one of many organisms that in fact inhabit the earth. So when we're talking about physical or biological anthropology, what we have is a specialty of anthropology that looks at human beings as biological organisms and tries to discover what characteristics make us similar to or different from other living things. Just as a note to you guys, forensic anthropology would fall into this subfield. And of course, I don't know if I mentioned it in the last lecture or not clearly, but this was where I had entered into the field of anthropology. I was actually in physical anthropology doing forensic or heading towards forensic anthropology when I took a few sociocultural anthropology courses and discovered that I enjoyed that more so than the physical anthropology or the archaeology that I was doing at the time. And that's fairly common for sociocultural anthropologists to have come from some other subfield within the discipline before making the switch over. Now, archaeology is the subfield where human history and artifacts are studied. Archaeologists focus on the material remains of individuals, and by looking at these material remains, they try and piece together information, for example, about how a group of individuals may in fact have lived. So this is the subfield that is interested in what we can learn from the material remains that are left behind by human societies. Now, archaeology went through a period where the information that was being generated by them was kind of being called into question. And of course, with any science, there's always challenges to the information that you are generating. What archaeology kind of had to do was almost take a step back and say, okay, are we overstepping our reaches? Are we overstepping our bounds? And do we need to pay better attention to how people are currently living their lives and use some of that information to better interpret the information or better interpret the material items that we are in fact finding of these previous examples of their culture. So, archaeology is a very, very good subfield. And, when you look at the definition, you might be thinking that archaeology and the knowledge it can generate can only be used for extinct societies or extinct cultures. But what is happening now is that there are businesses and corporations that are finding out that archaeological methods and archaeological knowledge can in fact be used and is very relevant to what is going on today. So we have, for example, a chip company that was wanting to see if its marketing was working or not. So what the chip company did, and it was Pringles, what they did is they hired archaeologists to go into neighborhoods where they knew the age range of the individuals living in each neighborhood section. And so the archaeologists went through the garbage of these individuals, and they were basically looking to see who is eating Pringles, who isn't eating Pringles. So they come back to the chip manufacturer and they say to them, you're hitting with a demographic that's approximately, say, 65 to 85. And it seems like the ages that are underneath that age range aren't necessarily purchasing your product or aren't consuming it in the way that you think that they are, meaning that you're off target with what you're doing. And so Pringles had to think about their product and the marketing that they were using. Now, this is where you guys get to play around a little bit with this knowledge, and this is where you get to participate. So what archaeologists had to do at that moment, they had to play socio-cultural anthropologist, because Pringles wanted to know, why is it that we're not hitting this younger crowd, and why would our product be so attractive to someone in the age range from 65 to 85. So in order to answer this question, what we need to do is to think about how someone who's between the ages of 65 to 85 is living. What are their dietary concerns? What is their mobility like? What are their living arrangements? So what is their everyday life? And this is where the answer comes out as to why Pringles was so attractive to this age group. What we find, or what you can pull out of this, is that people don't eat as much when they hit an older age. And so portion sizes are coming down. They're being pared down. So instead of me opening up a big bag of chips, eating half the bag with 2 sandwiches at lunch, I am now at the age of 65, 75, or 85, having half a sandwich and 3 chips. Well, Pringles allows me to take a couple chips out of the can, to seal the can up, and to place it onto my shelf again. Pringles, the texture of them is easier to chew as well, right? If you think about it, it's potato flakes, and so when you put it into your mouth, dissolves a little bit easier. You don't have those overly hard bits that are hard to chew. So if you have any concerns with dentures, whatever it is, these are lessened by the product of Pringles itself. When I say I'm putting the Pringles can back up onto my shelf, there you have another kind of clue as to why this product would be attractive. Often as people get older, they start to size down. So they're not living in big houses anymore. They're starting to move into smaller and smaller dwellings, which means that the cupboard space that they have is being diminished. So a Pringles can sits very nicely upright onto a shelf. You can put approximately, I would say, 6 Pringles cans in the space that 1 or maybe 2 bags of chips would go. They are very easy to transport. If I'm not driving my own car anymore, if I'm on the bus, it's easier to carry a can of Pringles home. It's easier to open a can of Pringles, right, than having to deal with tearing open a bag of chips. It's, again, resealable. The container can be reused, etc. So you can see all of this information can be pulled out of how seniors live and why the product would be attractive. to them. So when Pringles is given this information, they say, cool, that's awesome. We're very pleased that they like our product. But of course, they were wanting to target and hit a younger demographic. So that's again when they turn back to anthropologists and say, how do younger people live, and tell us how we can kind of zone in on them and have them make a connection to the value of Pringles. And that was, of course, the shift that happened in the marketing. So making it an interactive part of an active daily life. So using the Pringles can as a frisbee, whatever it was, etc. This was how, anyways, anthropological knowledge and archaeological knowledge could be worked hand in hand and used for a current situation. Linguistic anthropology. Linguistic anthropology is the subfield where the relationship between language and culture is explored. So linguists are interested in how people use language. They look at how people use language in both a structural sense, and they also explore it in a historical sense by researching how different languages have in fact developed, how they have spread, how they are changing. Why are languages changing? Why are some languages not being used anymore, not being passed on to future generations, etc.? This is what a linguistic anthropologist would in fact be looking at. So language can tell us a lot about a culture. The language itself can in fact shape how people experience the world that they're living in. And when we get to the language section, we'll come back to this and we'll explore it in greater detail. But just to give you an idea of how linguistic anthropology can be very dynamic and very interesting, let's give you guys kind of a fieldwork example. So let's say you're an anthropologist and you are going to live with a cultural group in Peru, and you've done some pre-research on the area, and you are being informed that this area is an area where they speak Spanish. Spanish is their main language, the predominant language. From all your research accounts, you're being told that you should not expect to have individuals there speaking English. So you go to Peru, you go to this town, this village, and when you get there, you start talking to people and you find out that while the men there do in fact speak Spanish, they also speak English and Spanglish, so a blending of Spanish and English. Now you have a question in your mind, right? Where are they coming into contact with this other language, with English? And not only coming into contact with it, but how is it that they have developed a valuing of it to the point that they're learning it, right? And not only just learning English, but obviously there's this blended version that is emerging, this Spanglish that they're speaking. And so you move through this village and you start to notice that while the men there speak Spanish, speak English, and speak Spanglish, the women in this community only speak Spanish. And the children, up to a certain age, say 12 or 14, are only speaking Spanish as well. What do you think that would be telling you about what is going on? So we're simply focusing on their usage of language. And now we have this big kind of question mark. Why is it that the guys in the community are speaking Spanish, English, and Spanglish, while the women and children are only speaking Spanish? Now, there are different reasons as to why this could be happening, but one of the things that you may explore is, do the men need to know English or this blended Spanglish version of that for their jobs? So is there a corporation or an industry that has come into that region that is owned by a Western entity. So is it coming from a country where English is the predominant language? So mining, plantation, whatever it is, are these men having to learn learn English and learn Spanglish in order to survive within this kind of outsider industry that has come into their area? Another way to think about this is that perhaps there is a splitting of spheres, meaning that women tend to be relegated to kind of a domestic sphere. So they're not coming into contact with, quote unquote, outsiders. They're dealing with the household. They're dealing with things that happen within the home, whereas the men are freer to leave the household and deal with what's referred to as being kind of the public sphere. And in this public realm, what is happening is they're encountering individuals, tourists or whoever it is, and that they have learned that there is a value in them being able to communicate with these English speakers. So whether it's to do trade, to make sales, or whatever it is, they've come into contact with it. And it isn't that the women couldn't learn English, it's just that there's no value in them learning it. Within their sphere, within their realm, which is the domestic realm, the realm of the home, Spanish is perfectly fine for them. They're able to communicate. They have no issues with it. So they don't need to learn English, whereas the men within that community might need to have an understanding of the language. So anyways, that gives you guys just kind of an idea of how simply looking at language can give you a better understanding of what's going on in the domestic lives of individuals, the career lives of individuals. So what's going on with the economic system in this region? All this information, again, can be pulled out of, or at least have doors opened up to you in terms of how you can explore things just by seeing these language differences. So socio-cultural anthropology, this, as I said to you guys, will be the focus of this course. So in socio-cultural anthropology, we look at how societies are structured and how cultural meaning is created. So not only do socio-cultural anthropologists look at the differences between societies, but we also try and find similarities, as both the differences and the similarities give us insight into how people construct their own versions of what it means to be alive and what it means to be human. In sociocultural anthropology, we use fieldwork. We use participant observation. So we go and we live the daily lives of the individuals that we are studying. And we do something that makes us unique to all other social sciences in that we do what's called cross-cultural comparison. So in cross-cultural comparison, for myself, I look at funerary rituals in North America, but I don't look at them in isolation. So I wouldn't just say, oh, in Canada, this is how we do burials, or in Canada, this is how we would memorialize a car accident victim. What I do is I describe it, I interpret it, and then I look to other cultures to see what are they doing that's similar to us? What are they doing that's different to us? I'm not doing it so that I can judge one against the other, but what I'm trying to do is to find these patterns. What I'm trying to do is to kind of deepen my understanding of why perhaps we are doing the things that we are doing here. So again, we use cross-cultural comparison, and what we try and do is explore the differences and similarities between these different cultures as a way for us to better understand how people construct their own versions of what it means to be alive and what it means to be human. Now, applied anthropology is an emerging field in the discipline, and it's also a contested field, I guess, in some ways, in that there is tension with some kind of purist anthropologists who suggest that applied anthropology is a weakening or a watering down of the discipline, that it's taking away from the academic pursuits. So in applied anthropology, what an applied anthropologist does is they take anthropological knowledge from the other four subfields. So physical, biological anthropology, socio-cultural anthropology, archaeology, and linguistic anthropology. And they use the knowledge that can be generated in those subfields. They use it outside of academia. So we would take the knowledge that we are using and we would apply it to problems in the, the quote unquote real world. So things that are happening off campus. So we'll look to contemporary social issues. So for example, an example of applied anthropology would be the Pringles example that I gave to you guys. So taking knowledge that's generated from archaeology and socio-cultural anthropology and helping a corporation in terms of their marketing, in terms of shifting their demographic focus, etc. Now there are, of course, healthcare issues that we can look at, issues of, dealing with new corporations or industries coming to a region, etc. So we can look to kind of contemporary problems, contemporary social issues, and we can draw from our four subfield approach that we have, take that knowledge and use it again outside of academia. So it's a very good and a very kind of relevant usage of the knowledge that we can in fact create. What is culture? Now, I've said culture to you guys a couple times now, and it's about time that I give you a proper and a working definition of what culture is. Culture, from an anthropological perspective, is the learned set of ideas and behaviors that is acquired by individuals through social relationships. You can basically say that culture is a system of social knowledge that is shared by a group of individuals within one society or within one culture. So in terms of looking at culture, culture allows us to see and interpret the world in a very specific sort of way. We can use culture to adapt and to transform the world that we are living in. We all participate in multiple cultures. In the on-campus courses that I teach, I'll ask individuals, who knows someone from another culture? And often within the class, not everyone will raise their hands. And that's very, very interesting because the thing is that we carry so many cultures around with us and we switch between them so frequently, but we tend not to see these as being different cultures. So, for example, while I can say, I'm Ukrainian and that is my culture, I can also say that I was a speed skater and that there's a culture to being a speed skater and that the culture of being a speed skater is very different than the culture of being a hockey player. So you can see again how culture can be understood, that it is so varied, it's so vast, it's dynamic, it's not static. And the big thing again is that it's a learned set of ideas and behaviors that are acquired by individuals within social relationships. So there are characteristics of cultures. All cultures have these 5 characteristics in common. Culture is learned. As an infant, as an individual who is new to a culture, you are going to be taught by individuals how to act in an appropriate way, and you're also going to be informed about what you can expect from others. So that means others of a certain gender, of a certain age, of a certain status, occupational role, etc. You're going to be given this information. Now, the information that you're learning can come from direct communication, meaning that they can say to you, use this fork and not that one, or it can come from you watching, observing, and obviously it comes from also making mistakes. So you make a mistake, someone will correct your behavior, excuse me, and that is how you will learn that this is what's expected of me rather than this previous assumption that I have. Culture is based upon symbols. So a symbol is basically something that stands for something else. And so within a culture, we have different understandings of things. And this is what can make first kind of encounters with cultures difficult, that you're not understanding the nuances, you're not understanding the subtleties of these symbols. Culture is shared. We pass it on from one individual to the next, which means that it's constantly changing, it's fluid, it's dynamic, it's not static, and it's not just one singular thing. Culture is plural. Culture is patterned, or culture is integrated. Culture has usually within it a system of understandings. It's almost like a structure. And that allows us as social scientists, or as anthropologists in particular to this discipline, it allows us to see what is kind of underlying the decisions that people are making, or the interpretation that they're having of certain events. So culture does have kind of I hate to say a logic, but I guess in a way a little bit of a logic behind it. And culture is usually adaptive. Again, this just simply means that culture is not static, that it is going to change. People are using it in their day-to-day lives, and through their usage of it, it is being altered, right? It's being altered to reflect their understanding better, their experiencing of things. And so obviously over time, it is going to change. Now, when approaching other cultures, there are different ways that we can address them, or we can understand them. The best way and the anthropological way to approach another culture is by being relativistic. Now, relativism is basically the attempt to understand the beliefs and behaviors of other cultures in terms of the culture in which they are found. This allows us to try and shed any preconceived notions, values, or judgments we may have about another culture, and to try and understand that within this culture, within this environment, within this point in their historical existence, these things have value, these things have meaning to them. So it makes cultural sense that they're being done the way that they are in fact being done. Now, anthropology didn't always have this relativistic approach, right? We early on in our history had what's referred to as being a very kind of judgmental or ethnocentric way of doing things. And we'll look at that in just a second here. One thing I want to point out to you guys that has been suggested about anthropology is that there can be a flaw in relativism, in that if we are too relativistic, then basically we are putting ourselves in a position of not being able to judge any act as being incorrect and or wrong. So again, if we're being too relativistic, then basically what we are saying is any practice, any action within any culture is tolerable or is acceptable so long as they can demonstrate the logic or the valuing that they give to it. So that means if we were to step into a culture and they practice, and I'm saying nowadays, we step into a culture and they practice child sacrifices. And if we're being overly relativistic, we would not be able to judge that practice. We would simply, ask them, why is it that you do this? They would say, well, historically, we've always done it. And by doing this, it allows us to control crops. We have better crop production or whatever it is. And it makes sense to us. Everyone else within our culture is in agreement that this works. And so, again, being overly relativistic, we would have to kind of step back and say, okay, you've explained it to me. It makes sense to you. So there's nothing we can do about that. Now, the reality is that anthropologists don't, right? There are obviously moral and ethical concerns that we can validly have about cultural practices or cultural behaviors, but it's always tough to judge, right? Am I thinking that this is incorrect because I have this Western perspective, or is this in fact a violation of a human right or basic human decency, etc.? But it can make things very, very difficult when you are doing field work. Now, ethnocentrism was something I mentioned to you guys just a moment ago. Ethnocentrism is often a default position for a lot of individuals. And I think most individuals are kind of raised with this notion that the way that we do things within our own cultures, obviously, is thought of as being the right, true, and the correct way to do things. In fact, for some individuals, they think that the way that they do things is the only true way of being human, and that everything else is wrong, everything else is immoral, everything else is a sin, however you want to word it. So ethnocentrism is the opinion that one's way of life is natural or correct, and indeed is the only true way of being human. The thing about ethnocentrism is that most of us in our day-to-day lives carry it with us. We have to, in order to survive, have at least a degree of ethnocentrism in our thinking. We have to think about our lives and think, yes, the fact that I, as a female, act in a certain way, or I, as a female within this culture, I'm going to expect this of other individuals, and they are going to expect this of me. We sleep a certain way, brush our teeth, comb our hair, wear clothes, wear a certain type of clothes, etc. These things are all a part of our culture. Where ethnocentrism becomes problematic is when people use their own perspectives about how they live their lives to judge and devalue other cultural ways of living. So ethnocentrism, again, can be used on a day-to-day basis, in order to kind of understand the way that we do things. So you aren't always having the rug pulled out from underneath you, because if you had to question every aspect of your life, every day, every moment, you would not be able to survive. But what you need to do when you are experiencing something that is seen to be kind of different from the way that you would do things, or foreign to how you would have done things, you need to hit what I refer to as being the ethnocentric pause button. So rather than judging this other culture, rather than judging this other practice as being wrong and or immoral, you need to step back and be relativistic for a second. You need to say, okay, I'm going to try and understand this belief and or behavior in terms of the culture in which it is being practiced. So I'm going to try and understand why it is that perhaps within this culture, male circumcision is valued, and what it means to masculinity, what it means to family, what it means to lineage. So the passing on of a male lineage or power, status, whatever it is. So rather than defaulting to it being a barbaric cultural practice, I'm going to say, does it make sense within this culture? What is the reasoning for this practice still being done? That is being relativistic. It does not mean that you have to agree with the practice. It does not mean that you have to condone it, but you're trying to understand it in terms of the culture in which you are finding it. So very important as we move through this course that you are aware that you have ethnocentrism in you, that a lot of the judgments that you make about other cultures are based upon this ethnocentric perspective, and that you develop the skill to hit that pause button just for a moment so you can be more relativistic in how you do things and how you view things. So at this moment, what I want you guys to do is to stop or pause, this lecture, go and watch video number 2 on your courses. And once you have done that, come back to this lecture. All right, so now that you've watched the video, you should have seen that, the perspective that you were seeing, I guess, in this video was from the point of view of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan watching the security force members learn how to do jumping jacks. Now, your initial reaction, I imagine, for many of you, was to find it humorous. It's I think, difficult for many of us who were raised in North America to fathom how it is that adults are unable to coordinate doing something that we view to be very simple and something that we view to be very easy to do. Now, in order to kind of understand how this is ethnocentrism, obviously it's coming from our own judgment, it's coming from our own perspective, it's coming from our own history and experience of this. So again, in North America, many of us would have been exposed to jumping jacks as young children. We would have learned it as part of our physical activity programs in schools. And so what we're doing is we're thinking, geez, if my 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old nephew or niece can figure out how to do jumping jacks, how is it that this adult in his 20s can't do the same thing? And by thinking in this sort of way, what we're doing is we are putting this 20-year-old adult on the same level as a child and saying, well, there must be something going on, lack of coordination, lack of mental ability, whatever it is. And if we can't even teach them how to do jumping jacks, then how can we trust them to protect themselves? So we've made them into children that need to be protected. But there's a whole other side to this, and there's a whole other way to look at these things. Think about the perspective of the security force members themselves. Why is it that they would not know how to do jumping jacks? Simplest answer, within that cultural system, there was just no valuing or no need to learn how to do a jumping jack. So if there's no value for it, no need for it, why would they have spent the time as children learning how to do this? From their perspective also, they may be looking at the U.S. soldiers doing the jumping jacks in unison and thinking to themselves, well, that's flawed, right? If you're all acting in the same way, behaving in the same way, dressing in the same sort of way, that makes you easier targets, right? We know that if one moves to the left, you're all going to move to the left. So we know to shoot, this way, or we know to do certain things because your behavior is very easy to predict. So again, there's different perspectives that are happening here. And that if you don't kind of pause your ethnocentrism, it's very easy to fall into a judgmental approach where you're judging individuals and you're interpreting things not necessarily in an incorrect sort of way, but in a hierarchical sort of way, seeing one group as being better than the other group, and that isn't the way that we want to be doing things during this course. Again, we want to try and be as relativistic as possible. So I'd asked you guys to do the reading, Body Ritual Among the Nasarima. If you haven't read it yet, just pause the video for a second. It will only take you a couple minutes to read the ethnography, and then come back to it, and we'll have a little bit of a discussion about it. So in terms of body ritual among the Nasarima, I imagine that some of you are able to figure out who the Nasarima are. The Nasarima are Americans. Horace Minor wrote this piece in 1956 in response to what he was viewing occurring in anthropological literature. So, in ethnographic accounts, in articles, in films that were coming out that were using anthropological knowledge, he was finding that people were being very judgmental and very, very ethnocentric in what they were doing. So, by taking an ethnocentric stance or perspective, they were in fact judging these other cultures and causing them to be represented as though they were savages, as if they were exotic, as if they were just so foreign that they almost weren't human. And so Minor thought to himself, as I've asked you guys to do in many ways, what if an anthropologist from outside of the United States spent a couple months following American families around, and they weren't familiar with the way that we did things in North America? How would they view things? How would they judge things? What interpretation would they have of our actions? And so he found that any culture, if taken from an ethnocentric perspective, can be seen as being, savage, barbaric, less than human. And so Minor's piece really highlights the difficulties that anthropologists go through in describing other cultures. It's very hard to ensure that the representation of that culture is correct or is in fact true, or the way that things should be done. So, within every discipline, there are struggles that people have, and most definitely in anthropology, and especially given kind of the history of anthropology, where some of the knowledge that was being generated was used in not the best ways. We've had to be very, very careful about how it is that we are representing these other cultures to not only academia, but to people outside of academia as well. So we always are being cautious about our own ethnocentrism, and we're being very, very careful about the interpretation we are having of the actions of other individuals. So what I want us to do is just take a moment and try and be kind of critical about a current news story. So what we need to do when we use critical cultural relativism is pose questions about cultural beliefs and practices. We need to look at these individuals who are accepting these beliefs. We need to understand, is there a power dynamic in place? Are people being forced to do things against their own will? Are these things incorrect? Who's benefiting from them? And what are the power dynamics that exist that enable these beliefs and practices to happen? So in terms of Canada, one thing that we can look at is, the bill that was passed for reporting of barbaric cultural practices, and the bill that was put in place to help us as Canadians kind of combat barbaric cultural practices happening. Now, language is very important when exploring these news stories or exploring anything in terms of an anthropological manner. Barbaric itself seems to imply that it lacks morals, it lacks ethics, that it's something that's being done by individuals who are not fully human, or who are seen to be kind of lower down on this social evolutionary scale. The word itself, barbaric, was questioned, was challenged, but remained in place because it was believed that it would instill fear in individuals who were doing these practices. So in a way, we could shame them, right? We could shame them into not wanting to do them. Things that were looked at obviously were the wearing of the niqab, so a head covering. They wanted to look at marriage practices, and so They were going to create laws that would crack down on polygamy, which is multiple or plural marriages. They would make forced marriages obviously illegal. And so they wanted to increase the age where it was legal to get married in Canada, moving it up to 16 right across the board. They would also demand explicit consent. And they would prohibit anyone in a polygamous relationship from actually coming to Canada, immigrating to Canada. So again, anyone who was coming from another culture where polygamy, multiple or plural marriages, is accepted within that cultural system would not be able to come into Canada because we would be condemning that as being a barbaric cultural practice. Now, the big challenge that came out about this is, from whose perspective is this coming from? Are we saying, listen, we have our own cultural system here, and that is the only way to do things. And so what we do is normal to us. It has a value within our own culture. So, that's just the way things should be. Anything that's foreign to our cultural system should be or can be deemed as being barbaric. Now, this is a not positive or a not proper way to do things, because obviously we're not seeing things in terms of being relativistic. We're being very, very ethnocentric. And so, if we were going to draw any lesson from Horace Minor's piece, Body Ritual Among the Nasarima, I think it's fair to say that someone from outside of North American or outside of Canadian culture would look at a lot of things that we do in Canada and things that we value and things that we take pride in, and they would say, wow, that is incredibly barbaric, right? And if it's barbaric, well, then we should be reporting it. And so you can see how we can use this kind of critical cultural relativism to question these things, to look at news story, to look at news, things that are going on around us, and to come to a more balanced approach to them. And again, to really reveal the power dynamics behind these things. Who's going to benefit? Who is going to be harmed? What is the reason behind someone wanting to make this the way that we approach things? So again, critical cultural relativism is very, very good as a way to keep balances and checks in place. Anthropology and anthropological research involves doing field work, involves doing participant observation. One thing, again, that makes anthropology a little bit different than other social science disciplines is that we focus on qualitative research rather than quantitative. It doesn't mean that we don't use surveys and census, but we tend to not overemphasize those. So they can be used on occasion, but generally, for the most part, socio-cultural anthropologists are going to put focus on qualitative research. So we're going to use participant observation. We're going to live the everyday lives of the individuals that we are wishing to study over a longer period of time. We're going to opt for face-to-face interviews with individuals. We're going to listen to them and pay attention to what individuals are saying and what they are doing. And also, we're going to be looking for what it is that they're not saying. We're looking to body language. We're looking to the environment. We're looking to all these different things that can't ever be revealed in a survey, in a census, right? You're not getting these subtleties or these nuances if you're only focused on a survey. To give you guys an idea of how a survey can be limiting, when I was a grad student at Carleton, we were a blended department, meaning that it was sociology and anthropology. And in my office, I shared a space with a sociologist who was inputting into kind of an Excel spreadsheet information that she had received on a survey. looking at understandings of safe sex practices in high schools. So as she's going through the information and inputting it from this questionnaire that she had handed out, she gets to a response and she started to laugh. And I said, "Oh, what are you laughing at?" And she said, "Oh, this one student here, what they've done is they said the best way to think about, or the safest sex practice out there was abstinence. That, no other practice would be appropriate, no other practice would be acceptable. So that means condom usage, birth control, etc. That for them, the only safe sex practice was abstinence." And she said, "Well, that's just not realistic and that's not appropriate. And obviously, this student needs to be educated better on the options that are available to them." And so I asked the sociologist, I said, "Well, what faith is this student? Are they Catholic? Are they Muslim? Is there some other reason behind their response?" And she was not able to give me that information because, and I think you can understand what I'm saying here, in that if someone had a belief system which told them that, not just told them, but that they followed it and was very important to them and valuable to them, that the only way to approach sex was that, abstinence until you are married, that is an appropriate response for them. Whereas, of course, I'm sure they are aware there's condoms, birth control, etc. From their own perspective, from their own cultural, religious, and social understanding, this was the appropriate way to view things. But the questionnaire was so limiting in that it did not even bring that into the picture at all. So again, there's kind of a limit to quantitative research, and that's why sociocultural anthropologists and generally anthropologists from all the subfields prefer to do qualitative research over quantitative. Now, research methods that we have in anthropology. There's the ethnographic method, which is where we have long-term engagements with individuals. And it may involve the usage of both quantitative and qualitative methods. Again, qualitative research tends to be the focus of anthropology, but we do use surveys or can use surveys, questionnaires, etc. Participant observation is a key element within anthropological research. So this is where we, involve ourselves in the daily lives of those individuals that are being studied. We, do the things that they're doing. We learn them. We are actively participating in every aspect of their lives. And it's so very important because we will notice that our bodies are changing, our perspectives are changing, how we're viewing things and interpreting them is going to change over time, especially the longer that we spend within this, what should be kind of a new culture to us. We do participant observation through field work. So field work involves the meeting of people of at least two cultures. So we'll have the culture of the researcher, or the dominant culture of the researcher, and the culture of that individual that the researcher is trying to understand. And so, for example, being a speed skater, I could do field work on what it is to be a hockey player. Now, that is the meeting of two cultures. I'm going in with speed skating being my dominant culture, my previous experience, and I want to know what it means to be a hockey player in Canada. And so to learn this, I need to learn how to put the gear on. I need to learn how to tape a hockey stick. I need to learn how to wear the hockey skates, how to properly skate with them, what position I'm going to play, the language that's involved in being a hockey player, the bonding that happens, team play, coaching, etc. All these different things. So fieldwork, again, is our using of participant observation in order to try and understand this other culture. So what I would like you guys to do is just to take a second here, pause, and watch this video on doing field work. It's around 8 minutes long, gives you an idea of all the different types of field work, or sorry, some of the different types of field work that can be done. All right, so participant observation, already covered this, anthropological technique involving the observation and participation in the daily lives of individuals. Now, in order to do participant observation, part of it involves, or not part of it, the initial kind of contact involves us getting informed consent. So if I was to do research on what it is to be a hockey player, I'm not going to go in there like a spy. I'm not going to go in there and try and kind of blend into the background and not let them know that I'm in fact doing research. What I'm going to do is I'm going to approach individuals. I'm going to say, hello, I'm Charisma Thompson from the University of Regina, and I am doing research on what it means to be a hockey player in Canada. Do you want to participate in this? Can I use parts of our conversation for my written work, for my filmed work, whatever it is? Do you allow me to use your name? Would you like a pseudonym? All the little kind of bits and pieces. What it is, though, it's making ourselves known. Right? It makes participants aware of our goals or intentions. Now, sometimes we don't know the absolute goal or, the end intention that we do have, but of course we have an initial reason as to why we are doing this research. And by getting informed consent, we're giving people control over the information that they are sharing with us. And they have the ability to say, listen, I don't want you to use that. Even though I did say it to you, I don't want you to use that. Or you can use it in written form, but you can't use it in film form. Whatever it is, they're the ones that are going to be setting the parameters of their knowledge that they are in fact sharing with us. And so this allows us to keep kind of an ethical commitment to these individuals, to the participants in our research. So informed consent, very, very important to anthropology. So what is it that anthropologists are generating through this knowledge sharing that they are doing with individuals as they are part of their everyday lives? Anthropologists create what's referred to as being ethnography. It is a written description and analysis of an anthropologist's experiences and interactions with a group of individuals. Ethnography can take the form of a written description and analysis, or we can also create ethnographic films. So we can go in and instead of putting it down in written form, we can create the same kind of interpretation through film, through clips of individuals, through the bringing together of interviews, dances, whatever it is. So ethnography is basically a description and an analysis of our experiences and interactions with individuals that we are wishing to study. Now, there are different perspectives that can be used, but exist in terms of looking at the behavior or beliefs of individuals. Emic perspective is basically the native or lived point of view. It's a description of a behavior or belief in terms of the person who is within that culture. So as a speed skater, if I want to have an emic description of what it means to be a hockey player, I need to ask a hockey player what it means to be a hockey player. I need that insider perspective, that lived perspective, to get that emic understanding. Etic understanding is an outsider's perspective. Often it is the perspective that an anthropologist takes or has as their starting point when they're beginning to study a culture that is new to them. So as a speed skater, my initial understanding of what it means to be a hockey player within Canada is going to be an etic understanding. As I start to play hockey, as I live as a hockey player, as time passes, I begin to take on a more emic or insider perspective as to what it means to be a hockey player. So emic is inside, etic is an outside perspective, is the best and easiest way to think about this. Now, these terms will come up in other lectures, so just kind of figure out the best way to understand them. But again, emic is an insider's perspective, that lived point of view. Etic is an outsider's perspective and is usually culturally neutral. So within anthropology, the approach that we take to anything that we are studying or anything that we are trying to understand is we approach it from a holistic understanding. And what that means is that we look at all of the properties within a given cultural system. So if I want to understand child poverty in Brazil, I don't just say, well, it comes from a mother's laziness, or it comes from the military history within that nation. That's being too simplistic. That's looking at just one aspect of this whole system. If I want to understand the prevalence of child poverty within a region, what I need to do is to look to physical aspects of individuals, biological aspects, environmental issues. Are there industries that have come in and depleted resources from that area? What are the economic systems that exist? What language is being used, which can tell me about exposure to other corporations, industries, ways of doing things, movements of people, etc. Basically, what we do is we acknowledge. We cannot understand what is going on if we just look at one component alone. What we need to do is look at the system as a whole, because that is going to determine how all these other parts work together and how they influence one another and how they create this cultural system. So we want to look to religious understandings, social understandings, environmental conditions, the history of a group of individuals, who has come through this region, who has left this region, who has had power over time, who has lost power, etc. All of these things, again, are very important if we're going to have a complete understanding. So again, in anthropology, we take a holistic approach to our exploration of any culture or any kind of aspect of a culture when we're doing our research. So representation of cultures. Now, when we're talking about representation, it's basically the way that a group of individuals is depicted and how they are depicted and being described through writing or through images. Now, with the Horace Minor piece, again, we can see how easy it is when using an ethnocentric perspective to create the impression that these individuals are barbaric, that they're savage, that they're superstitious, that they lack logic or they lack morals, whatever it is, that if we aren't very, very careful, we can misrepresent the individuals, which can have detrimental impact on their way of living. So very important that we're careful about how we represent a group of individuals, as some representations can be incorrect or misguided. They can stem from racism, sexism, homophobism, or essentialism. Now, essentialism is something that, again, a lot of people do, or a lot of people take as kind of a default position. So essentialism is the act of creating generalizations or stereotypes about the behavior or culture of a group of individuals. And essentialism can cause us to judge other individuals in a way that is not needed, that lacks any value. So saying that we do things one way, which demonstrates that we are logical, we're intelligent, that we are very, very ethical or moral. So when I wear a habit as a nun within the Catholic tradition, that demonstrates that I am empowered and that I am devoted to my religious belief system. So this is a choice I made, and it demonstrates how dedicated I am to my belief. Whereas a woman who wears a niqab within the Muslim tradition, often, unfortunately, it's believed that she's doing this because she is oppressed. She's being forced to do it. So the same kind of head covering can be thought of as being oppressive on one hand, depending on what your perspective is, and looking at it from another way, so the habit that a nun wears, it's seen to be a sign of freedom, a sign of agency, that I am able to make this decision because I come from, this quote unquote civilized society that allows me to practice this belief and to find value and to feel comfortable in doing so. So essentialism is very, very damaging. Again, it's the act of creating generalizations or stereotypes about the behavior of a group of individuals, and that it can be very, very kind of damaging to people if we aren't careful about it. And these stereotypes and these looking at essentialism, it's stereotypes. It's assumptions that we make about the expectations of others, their motivations, etc. And it's a judgment. It absolutely is a judgment, and we should instead try and kind of pause our ethnocism, pause our judgment of these individuals, and to try and be more relativistic, so to understand these cultural practices, beliefs, and or behaviors in terms of the culture in which they are found. All right, so we're going to end off this lecture by briefly looking at early anthropology and taking you through just a couple anthropologists who represent different points within anthropology. So we have Edward B. Tyler. Edward B. Tyler made a major contribution to the field of anthropology through his definition of culture, which you see here on the slide. So he says culture or civilization, taken in its wide ethnographic sense, is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, moral, law, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. Now, when Tyler was doing his work, evolution was a big kind of, it was a big part of not only academia, but just kind of general knowledge that was out there. And so what we have is this understanding that, if evolution can exist within animal species, then it must also exist within cultural groups as well. So Tyler, in fact, believed in the evolution of cultures. So Darwin had written The Origin of Species, and the influence of his theory was saturating the academic realm. And so everyone was looking at this theory that was emerging and saying, okay, so we should be able to map out kind of primitive forms of everything and to follow different examples so that we can see this linear progression from a primitive form of something to the more advanced form of it. And so Tyler was doing what everyone else was doing, and he was saying, listen, there are examples of primitive cultures, and then we can see, some that are a little bit more advanced, some that are more advanced, and then at the end of this social evolutionary linear scale is the civilized world. Now, the civilized world was, of course, the world that Edward Tyler was in fact living in himself. But this is a mistaken understanding. Cultures do not progress. Cultures are not on this linear scale going from being primitive to being more civilized. That understanding of evolution is incorrect to begin with. Evolution is not goal orientated. It has nothing to do with going from a primitive form or simplistic form to a more advanced form. Evolution is all over the board. You can take 2 steps, quote unquote, forward, and 3 steps backwards. You can go left, you can go right. Evolution itself is dependent upon the environment, is dependent upon all these other factors, and that it is not that you're going from a bad version to a better version. That isn't the way that things work. It just means you're going from one version to a version that's better suited in that time or in that moment. So Tyler, unfortunately, was misinformed about evolution, but he was doing what everyone else at this time was in fact also participating in, which is putting things onto scales and saying things go from primitive form to a more advanced form. Within anthropology now, we do not do this. We don't use hierarchies when we're trying to explore cultures and when we're looking to other cultures. We don't say one culture is better than another. Again, we try and understand the culture in terms of its own social system. And we look at things as being just other examples of what it means to be alive and what it means to be human. Now, E.B. Tyler, as many anthropologists did at this time, participated in what's referred to as being armchair anthropology. So E.B. Tyler did not do field work, did not do participant observation. Instead, what he did is he relied on second-hand accounts or third-hand accounts of individuals who were actually coming into contact with these other cultural groups. So he'd look to missionary reports. He would take reports from colonial explorers. So their diaries, letters home, etc., were the sources that he was using in order to come up with his understanding of these cultures. Now, this is problematic because obviously someone who's going in as a missionary or someone who's going in as a colonial explorer has a goal in mind, right? They have already preconceived idea of this cultural group and they have a reason as to why they are there in the first place. And so it's easy to understand that a lot of the writings that they were doing were being done to justify their own presence there. So they're skewed, they're biased, they're not neutral at all. But Tyler was treating them as though they were in fact neutral. And so he kind of had a misunderstanding of, as again did many early anthropologists, a misunderstanding of the cultures that he was looking at. Mainly, or a big part of it was that he was participating in armchair anthropology, not doing field work, and not going out and doing participant observation. Franz Boas was the individual who really pushed for a relativistic approach to anthropological research. So he firmly believed that we needed to understand the beliefs and behaviors of other cultures in terms of the culture in which we are finding them. He fought against the usage of these linear progressions or this hierarchy where we would say one culture was lower down on the evolutionary scale and one was seen to be higher up. He said it does not work that way. It can't work that way. Again, these things make sense within their own cultural system, and that is how they should be understood. Now, Franz Boas did participate in salvage anthropology. Now, salvage anthropology is where we have anthropologists who were concerned about different cultures dying out or becoming extinct or becoming assimilated with another culture. There was a fear in the late 1800s that all these different ways of being alive and being human were going to vanish. So it was the goal and the purpose of the anthropologists to preserve them. So Franz Boas was an individual who participated in this salvage anthropology. And what they would do is try and record all aspects of a culture upon initial contact with them, so that there would be a historical record should this culture become extinct. Now, it was problematic and is still problematic to this day, in that what happened during some salvage anthropology is that cultural artifacts, heritage items, I guess it wouldn't be called heritage items, but items that people were using were taken away from them, were placed into museums. And individuals at this time thought that they were doing so to the benefit of this cultural group. You know, we'll take this religious item and we will put it into a museum and it will be preserved so that future generations can in fact see it. Well, the thing is that you've taken it away from the individuals who were using it. You know, so there was no benefit to them at this time. But of course, you know, this was the thinking that was going on then. And it was kind of, you know, I don't want to say it was misguided. I mean, we can look back now and say that it was misguided. At the time, they thought that they were doing good by saving these artifacts and saving these things and these languages and these dances, etc. But of course, you know, hindsight is, of course, 2020. And so now anthropology has learned a lot from the mistakes it made previously. And so we don't look to salvage anthropology as the way to do things. You know, but the benefit or the very good thing of Franz Boas, of course, was his push for this relativistic approach. And he really altered and changed the way that museum displays were done and the way that we would view artifacts. So, for example, museums, and there's still a few around that like to do this, but you know, a lot have kind of moved away from it. Museums used to, if say we had a display on weapons and how weapons have changed throughout history, they would say, here's the most primitive weapon, it's a rock. And here's a little bit more advanced weapon. It's a stick that's been made pointy. And here's the next advancement in weaponry. It's a bow and arrow. And then a gun. And then a nuclear weapon. And they would say the rock is the most primitive and this nuclear weapon is the most advanced. And Boas, at the time, and it makes sense even now, would say, listen, you can't say that a rock is a non-advanced weapon. And you can't say that the individuals who used this rock as a weapon were also non-advanced. It could be that within this cultural system, the rock makes the best sense. So let's say that these individuals are from an area where there's no trees. It isn't that they wouldn't have developed a pointy stick weapon or a bow and arrow. They just didn't have the materials there to do so. Or if they came into contact with the materials, they used them for things other than because their rock weapon worked fine enough for all their needs. So he was able to say, listen, you have to look at these items within the culture in which you are finding them. And only then will you understand the valuing of them. And only then will you be able to properly interpret what these things mean to the people and how it is or why it is that they are in fact using them. So again, cultural relativism, a really big contribution from Franz Boas, and he was also an individual who really stressed the importance of field work. So he got out of the armchair, he went into the field, he did the work, he learned the languages, you know, he learned the dances, he ate the food, he did participant observation. So he was definitely someone who really shaped the way anthropology is done today. Another individual who did this was Malinowski. And Malinowski stressed the primacy of field work that needed to exist. So Malinowski, Polish-born, British-trained, in 1914, goes to the Trobriand Islands. And he makes a decision while there to leave the comfort of this colonial house that he was staying in, even though the people who were in the house really strongly objected and said, you should not leave this house, you should stay where you are. He said, absolutely not. Went out, got a tent, set up camp near the village of, where the individuals that he wished to study were living, and he started to do participant observation. And through doing this participant observation and kind of forcing himself out of this comfort zone, he realized the importance of fieldwork. He realized the importance of bridging that gap or that divide to, remove the barrier of this distance. That if we were going to get an emic understanding, we had to get our feet dirty. We had to get our hands dirty. We really had to become, as much as possible, become a member of the culture that we are in fact looking at. And so he really strongly demonstrated, right? Whereas Boas was saying this is what we should do, and he was demonstrating it as well. But people really looked to Malinowski and said, okay, there is an absolute need for us to do long-term participant observation as a fieldwork strategy, that this has to be the way that we do things kind of going forward within anthropology. All right, so we have talked about salvage anthropology and how with salvage anthropology, we were trying to quickly record and save all these artifacts because there's a fear that these cultures would become extinct, and that was our purpose, was to ensure that there would be a record of them. And we realized that was obviously incorrect. We turned to cultural relativism, we turned to fieldwork, participant observation, and we said this is the way that we're going to do things going forward. The more recent thing that has happened in terms of a shift in anthropology is that we now are starting to do multi-sited fieldwork. And with multi-sited fieldwork, basically we find ourselves realizing that cultural processes are not contained to singular kind of social, ethnic, religious, or national boundaries. And so that there is this wider expanse that we need to be looking at. And of course, the digital realm has caused us to realize this. And so the ethnographer has to follow these processes from site to site and do field work in multiple sites at once. And this is something that traditionally anthropologists did not have to concern themselves with. But now most definitely it's becoming a bigger part of anthropology. So again, multi-sited ethnography is ethnographic research on cultural processes that are not contained by social, ethnic, religious, or national boundaries, and it is the digital realm which has caused us to not only realize that, but to find value in doing this multi-sited field work. So what I would like you guys to do now is to just pause and to give a watch to, I think it's video number 5 that is up there for you, just a short little clip giving you an example of multi-sited field work and how it is in fact done. All right, so the last thing we're going to be looking at today is just culture shock. And this is something that isn't just experienced by anthropologists, it is experienced by all of us. Cultural shock is the disorientation that you experience when you step into a culture that is unfamiliar to you. And so it's that moment when you're not sure, do I use this fork or that fork? Can I speak to this person, or how is it that I'm supposed to speak to this individual? How am I supposed to dress? Should my head be covered or not? Can my toes be bare? All these different things that all of us have experienced. at various times in our lives. Now, when you do field work, you of course experience culture shock. And so there are different stages that you go through that allow you to adjust to this new culture. It's becoming proficient in the language, understanding the subtleties and the nuances of it, becoming more comfortable within the climate, the changing of the climate, the foods, the behaviors, the expectations that people have of you, that you have of them, etc. And so culture shock and getting over culture shock is a big part of being able to do anthropology. And, it also speaks to a problem that anthropologists, of course, experience as well, is that when you're doing participant observation, you're shifting between being a participant and being an observer. And this is very difficult to do because you're always kind of in and out of the culture and having to pull yourself back. And then you're dealing with culture shock on top of that. And what happens with individuals in anthropology, and of course people who live abroad or live in another culture for quite some time, is that eventually you become so comfortable within that culture that when you return back to your own culture, you experience culture shock again. So you've been within this other culture for so long that you go from having an etic or an outsider's perspective to having an emic or an insider perspective. And this new cultural system that you're in makes sense. The values all are in line with how you're valuing things, how you're interpreting things, etc. And then you come back to your own culture and you experience shock at the way people do things, and you can't understand it, and you don't see why they're giving value to this and not to this thing over here, whatever it is. So culture shock is a problem, and it is something obviously that anthropologists need to be aware of in order for them to do their field work appropriately, and also in order for them to be able to interpret the information and knowledge that they are gathering during their research time. All right, so that takes us to the end of this lecture. Please make sure, again, if you haven't reviewed the videos that I asked you guys to during this lecture, that you take the time now to do so, and also make sure that you do the reading body ritual among the Nasarima. Thank you very much.